Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna. Welcome to another episode of Context. Today on the program, we turn our attention to the long road toward peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan entering a new chapter. The full text of the agreement on the establishment of peace and interstate relations has now been made public. We can see in full what the two nations have committed to and the legal framework that underpins it. We will discuss what it means in legal terms, how it will be implemented, and what challenges still lie ahead. So joining us today is Javid Rahimli. He's an international lawyer from London, UK, and Onur Erim, President of Dragamon Strategies from Istanbul, Turkey. A warm welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hi.
Okay.
Thank you for having us.
So, Onur, the publication of this agreement is being called historic. In your view, how significant is it that the text, the full text, is now public?
Well, it is historic in a sense where it actually opens up a whole new gateway towards the West for Azerbaijan. It also has a monumental and an issue of joining the entire Turkish geography, especially towards Central Asia. So in whether you look at it, with your heart or with your brain, I think it has extremely significant outcomes from this agreement. How this will actually play out, how this will actually affect, and what will the ramifications of this will be, at least in the short term, is something we will have to wait and see.
Okay. And Javid, from a legal perspective, are there built-in mechanisms to ensure compliance, or is enforcement dependent entirely on political will?
In short, the enforcement of the agreement on establishment of peace and interstate relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia is dependent on the political will. But there is one provision, especially Article 13 of the peace agreement, which states that the parties guarantee the full implementation of the agreement, which also mentions that they're going to establish a bilateral commission to oversee the implementation of the agreement. Okay. If there is any dispute arising out of the interpretation of the provisions of the agreement or application of those provisions, then this issue might be raised before the bilateral commission, which will be established by the members of the Armenian and Azerbaijani Foreign Ministry and possibly by technical experts. The provision currently states that the modalities of the bilateral commission will be subject to subsequent negotiations. But for now, we don't know whether there will be any involvement of the third parties. But for now, we can say that the enforcement of the agreement is mostly dependent on the political will and the conclusions of the bilateral commission, which will be established in the subsequent negotiations.
Okay. And Onur, does the wording of the agreement leave any ambiguities that could later be disputed?
Well, I will not be the one to answer that question, as I am not an attorney. However, in any kind of international agreements, usually come with a set of international disputes as well. So whether it's ambiguous or not, once you have a political decision, and this is really a regional political decision for a next step forward, this does always mean that despite the wording in the agreement, the strength of the parties involved will always dominate how those articles are implemented and how those articles are interpreted.
Okay.
So we have seen over this in many instances over throughout the history. I'm one of those that believe that despite what it says on the paper, it will be the strength and the forthcoming attitude of the two countries involved in this directly, which is Armenia and Azerbaijan. It will depend on their strength and their approach towards this, is what will really constitute how well this agreement is actually takes into work, and it actually benefits all those that are involved. So don't want to sound very pessimistic, but when it comes to international agreements, I am one of those who believe that the wording only goes as far as the paper that it's usually written on. So there has to be a motive more than what's in writing to make sure that this project, this agreement, stays alive and beneficial to all in the region.
Okay. Now, Javid, let's talk a little bit more specific here about and look at the articles. On the basis of Article 1 and 2, could it now be confidently asserted that the principle of, and please excuse my pronunciation here, uti post-detai has been confirmed, and will the future delimitation and demarcation be based on 1991 borders?
Yes, this is an interesting point. Article 1 specifically refers to the principle of uti-post-detai, which basically means that the newly independent states inherit the administrative borders that existed at the time prior to independence, and in the Soviet Union context, that refers to the internal administrative borders of the republics of the Soviet Union. So as this article directly refers to this principle, now we can say that this principle has already crystallized in the demarcation and delimitation negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia. But even though they have an agreed provision on this principle, it does not necessarily mean that the parties cannot agree on transfer of borders or other any issues. Current peace agreement also mentions that parties will agree on the delimitation and demarcation agreement. So if they will, they can negotiate and they can agree on changing border outside of the Soviet Union administrative borders. But the current agreement is establishing that all the delimitation and demarcation negotiations will be based on the former Soviet Union borders.
Okay. And Onur, could the transparency of publishing the full text help build trust between the two societies, or might it expose clauses that some find contentious, perhaps?
It's a double-edged sword. I mean, if you look at it from the perspective of being transparent, yes, it should be. However, let's not forget there has been an extreme, tension, at times feuds, and for many years, Armenia trying to annex a part of Azerbaijan has occupied over 3 decades a part of Azerbaijan, and now, thank God, it's liberated. When the tensions are still very much not, cooled enough between the people of the two countries, I don't know, although one would wish that everything should be transparent, I don't know for the time being, for a certain amount of time, it would be wise to reveal all of the particulars of the agreement. So as I said, it's a double-edged sword. Not being inside the administration of Azerbaijan, obviously, I would probably say, we have to be transparent as an outsider of the government. We have to reveal everything. But I'm leaning towards to believe that had I been in the administration or have any kind of administrative part in the government of Azerbaijan, I would have probably done the exact opposite of what I'm saying right now, just due to the very delicate, position that the border is in, that the two countries are, especially the people of the two countries. So it's I'll finish with what I started with. It's a double-edged sword.
Okay. And Javid, Article 12 is very interesting. None of the parties may invoke the provisions of its internal legislation as justification for its failure to perform the present agreement. Could you talk us through that?
Yes, in terms of this Article 12, I would suggest to look at the negotiation history of the peace agreement, because the Armenian side, they were claiming that because the peace agreement is going to include a provision as such, claiming that none of the parties may invoke the provisions of the internal legislation as justification for failure to perform its obligations arising from the treaty. They were saying that we cannot claim based on our constitution that we have the territorial claim towards Azerbaijan so that we can ignore the obligations from treaty. So they were saying that because we're gonna include this provision in the peace agreement, there is no need for constitutional referendum. But Azerbaijani party were continuing to argue that the constitution of the Republic of Armenia is a supreme law in Armenia. They cannot refer to international treaty such as the peace agreement with Azerbaijan to ignore the constitution. That's why this peace treaty is subject to the referendum so that Armenia can amend its constitution, removing the territorial claims towards Azerbaijan. Besides that, this provision still carries an important weight because in the future years, we don't know what will happen in Azerbaijan or in Armenia. There might be different political ambitions so that parties can refer to national legislation, which is not supreme, but still carries some weight. This provision basically mirrors the Vienna Convention on the law of the treaties, which also states that the states cannot rely on the national legislation to ignore their international obligations. This provision basically strengthens the peace treaties' legal force by specifically including the Vienna Convention's obligation. Even though this provision wasn't there, that will be still a requirement under the law of the treaties, but having this specifically mentioned politically increases its weight.
Okay. And Onur, how might this agreement affect regional alliances, particularly with neighbouring states and global powers?
I think everybody's looking forward, well, except for few, everybody's looking forward to a peaceful and a working mechanism between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And, this is definitely, Armenia definitely needs this peace agreement. I do believe that Azerbaijan knows the importance of collaborating with Azerbaijan because Turkey has been on a state level has declared time after time that the relationship with Armenia will never normalize with Turkey unless they sort out all their problems with Azerbaijan. Hence saying that if Armenia needs any kind of a relationship, any kind of leadway, any kind of cooperation, be it from or through Turkey, it would have to be with the blessing of the state of Azerbaijan. So first and foremost, this agreement not being implemented well will hurt Armenia the most, for sure. And then, of course, a better working mechanism in the area, a better relationship between Armenia and Azerbaijan, at least on certain areas, will actually benefit the region as well. However, let's not forget, there are certainly from within Armenia and from within some of the regional and or neighboring nations, there are those that hate the idea of Armenia and Azerbaijan actually agreeing on certain points and actually can cooperate at least on the some of the common denominators as little as they may be. So I think there's a lot of pitfalls, there's a lot of blocks that is not very apparent. Most are concealed, as I said, by and I'll go as far as saying by some of the countries, some of the states regionally that do not want to see this cooperation going to the next level. So it's going to be a time issue. I think it's one of those things everybody must certainly take it one step at a time and just hope for the best, because this will be good, not just for the people of Azerbaijan, not for just for the good of people of Armenia, but for everybody in the region.
For sure. Okay, and Javid, before we move on, I want to go back to Article 12 again. That second paragraph, it says that the parties shall refrain from acts that would defeat the objective and purpose of this agreement prior to its entry into force. Now, does that mean the joint declaration creates legally binding obligations for the parties?
Here we can observe two separate matters to be addressed. First is the binding impact of the initiation of the peace agreement on the establishment of interstate relations, and also the legal impact, legal force of the joint statement, joint declaration on the outcomes of the Washington Peace Summit. Mm-hmm. In terms of that provision, which states that until the ratification, until the agreement comes into force, parties should refrain acting against object and purpose of the peace agreement. That specific provision is still not applicable because initialing does not establish such an obligation. Basically, that provision applies when parties will sign the peace agreement, but it won't be ratified. So in the period between signing of the peace agreement and the ratification, that will be a binding impact in terms of not acting against purpose and object of the peace agreement. In terms of the second part, which is the legal binding effect of the joint declaration on Washington Summit, this is a debated issue because that's not a peace treaty in a sense that which creates legally binding obligations, but there are different debates among scholars in terms of legal effect of the non-binding legal instruments that includes memorandum of understanding or joint declarations as the one in question. According to the Vienna Convention, any agreement which creates obligation is a treaty. Then people might claim that that's already establishing a legal obligation. That statement, joint declaration, specifically creates the obligations on Republic of Armenia in terms of right of passage of Azerbaijan to its enclave Nakhchivan, so that we can argue that that declaration already has a binding impact, but that's an issue which is in question and depending on the political will of the parties, not the law.
Okay. And Onur, if the agreement is successfully implemented, how do you see relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia evolving over the next decade?
I hope you could hear me because we got cut off towards the end of your question. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now, okay. Can you hear me a bit better?
Yes, now I can.
Would you like me to...
You totally got cut off. Please, if you can repeat the question.
Sure. So if the agreement is successfully implemented, how do you see relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan evolving over the next decade?
Well, I mean, it's no secret that if this agreement actually is implemented well, this will mean a cooperation at certain level between Azerbaijan and Armenia, at least on some of the economical, fields. This will also mean that both sides will actually benefit from this deal. Well, in time, these agreements and these economical, cooperations, so to speak, do have a tendency to, make one another, kind of, I wouldn't say inseparable, but very, very used to of one another. So if this is implemented well, although it now seems more likely to actually help the countries and the region on an economical level, if this continues and prospers well, there is no reason that this will not act as a softening power between the two countries to iron out maybe some of the other issues in the up and coming years. This always has been the case throughout the history. But as I said, we must first make sure that what is well intended with this project, which has taken another step in Washington, D.C. last week, does actually go to the next level of successful implementation without much trouble. As I said, these are things that we will have to wait and see.
Sure. And Javid, what role do international law and existing UN resolutions play in reinforcing this agreement?
The preamble of the peace treaty directly refers to the Charter of the United Nations and the Declaration on the Principles of International Law concerning the friendly relations and cooperation among states. And as we know, the law of the treaties states that the interpretation of the provisions of the agreements can be done by referring to its preamble in accordance with its object and purpose. So having the UN Charter and its other resolutions mentioned in the preamble mentions that any disputed matters arising from interpretation or application of this peace agreement will be interpreted within the context of the preamble, which includes the UN Charter and the resolution regarding friendly relations. Besides that, as we say that as Azerbaijan and Armenia are party to the several international treaties, and they're also member states of the United Nations and other international organizations, and all of them states that the parties should settle their disputes through peaceful resolutions. So current international obligations of the parties is separate to their obligations via in pursuit to peace agreement. So we can say that the other international treaties, especially the UN Charter and the Declaration on the Principles of International Law concerning the friendly relations, supports the very purpose of this agreement. And if there are any dispute arising out of this peace agreement, parties, by using the tools provided by international organizations, can try to agree on settlement. As I said before, the Article 12 mentions that disputes will be settled before bilateral commission. If not, within 6 months, parties can agree on settlement of dispute, so that it might be before the arbitration or before the ICJ. And in that case, we will see how those international obligations, international treaties, plays a role in regards to the peace agreement.
Okay. And Onur, looking at the regional picture, how might neighbouring states respond to this agreement?
I think it's very apparent. Some are going to like it. They're going to applaud. Some may not like it, but even those that like it and those that applaud, you could be rest assured that I don't think there is a big community within the region that would like to see any kind of a conflict resolved between Azerbaijan and Armenia. I think, I do truly believe this, that Turkey may be the only true supporter of a working corridor connecting Turkey to Azerbaijan wholeheartedly. And Armenia may not really like this idea in theory, in on the very basic level. However, they will support it because this actually presents a great opportunity for pumping more, life into Armenia. So I'm sorry, I just do not believe, at least if you discount all the countries east of Azerbaijan, the rest of the region, because those countries are also very supportive of the entire Turkic world. The rest of the regions, whether they're applauding it or not, I don't think any of them will benefit from a more powerful, more trouble-free Azerbaijan or Armenia.
Sure. And David, finally, what legal recourse exists if one side fails to meet its obligations under this agreement?
So according to the peace treaty and also the principle of pacta sunt servanda, the states are obliged to implement their obligations in good faith, meaning that they should do in their best way to follow the peace agreement and other relevant agreements. If they fail to follow peace agreement or other agreements arising from international law in regard to this treaty, it will count as an international wrongful act, and the other party can argue that because the party failed to follow its obligation under the treaty, so now I have a ground to follow a countermeasure. And usually the sanctions might be illegal under international law if it harms public interest or human rights, but because a party ignores its treaty obligations, the other party has a ground to say that because you failed, now I can suspend the treaty obligation in respect to that provision that you violated. So that will be one argument for the other state to follow up in terms of trying to enforce the implementation of the peace agreement, but that's limited for the injured state. In this case, let's say Armenia violates a provision regarding not to interfere with internal affairs of Azerbaijan, then Azerbaijan can say that because you violated that provision, I will be suspending that treaty for that period to solve the dispute. But this is only limited to parties of the treaty, here Azerbaijan and Armenia, but also the regional parties, including Turkey, can play an active role. As after the peace agreement, now we have a trade connecting Central Asia to Europe. All the regional players will significantly benefit from economic trade, so that they will be dependent on interrelations. If one of the parties ignore their obligations, the third parties, for example, Turkey, can implement retortion by implementing some trade restrictions to Armenia, so that to make them to follow the treaty obligations.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Javid. Onur, a big thank you to you as well. Thank you both for your valuable contribution on this program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, whether this agreement marks the beginning of a truly stable peace will depend not only on the words on paper, but on the commitment of both nations to uphold them. We'll continue to follow this story closely here on Context. Until next time, thanks for watching.